Aloha and welcome to Better Government from the Hawaii State Capitol. I'm Representative Gene Ward, and we're doing a series of interviewing leaders in our community. And with Veterans Day just around the corner, we have the privilege and the honor of interviewing the director of the Punch Bowl of the Pacific, the Memorial Cemetery, Director Gene Castagnetti. Gene, welcome to the program.
Well, thank you, Representative Ward. It's a privilege to be here, and I welcome the opportunity to share with your audience what we can give them about the future at the cemetery and what's going on here in the next couple of weeks, especially as it pertains to our veterans.
I'm looking forward to that. But there's a veteran sitting in front of me who served 28 years in the Marines. Before we talk about the beauty of the National Cemetery, how about some of the highlights of your background? I understand that you were a Marine colonel and served at Camp Smith.
Well, yes, sir, but you know, much of my Marine Corps career probably pales in comparison with the other contributions that our veterans have made over the years. So my life story isn't as important, but I will say that when I got my draft notice in 1961, I chose to be a Marine because I have an uncle who's still alive today at 92, who lived at home with me for many years and served in the Marine Corps. So he was my mentor. Mm-hmm. And I think all good families have mentors one way or another, but this uncle of mine landed at Guadalcanal in 1942 and went on to stay in the Marine Corps through World War II, Korea. And I met him on my first tour in Vietnam when I was a lieutenant, and he was a first sergeant of artillery. I went to Vietnam with the same expectations that President Kennedy had coached us on to do, is serve your nation, do something for your country. Coming out of Massachusetts, that was easy to follow. I think the biggest thing I would say about my Marine Corps career is the Marine Corps gave me an opportunity to achieve success beyond my expectations. And the leadership element that I learned in the Marine Corps, I think, has carried me in good stead no matter whatever else I've done in the Marine Corps community or civilian community. So I thank the Corps for that complete foundation of solid citizenship.
So after 2 tours in Vietnam, nói tiếng Việt Nam được rồi.
Yes, I learned a little bit of Vietnamese when I went to Vietnamese language school. And these things hold us in good stead, whether it's a little Japanese, a little Korean, because we have so many visitors to Hawaii. Being a multicultural state, you share with people the fact that their language, their nation is very meaningful in our whole global economy, how we work together as a community. I think being able to accept everybody else's race, religion, and nationality is a part of being a good leader. I don't consider myself any icon leader in the community. I consider myself a custodian of our veterans' remains, and I just happen to be the head custodian, if you'll allow me the liberty to say that, as I maintain the National Cemetery.
Interesting that you mentioned President Kennedy, in that the words of Kennedy to me resonated when he said, ask not what you can do, what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country. So I joined the Peace Corps, and like you, I'm also a Vietnam veteran, but I was one of the few who got drafted, even though generally speaking, if you served in the Peace Corps, the draft board looked aside. Having been a translator-interpreter, I had to throw a little bit of language out just to show that we've got that in common, as well as we're not that rusty. Right. Then maybe there's some Vietnamese watching who may say, well, your accent is really, really bad, but we'll get by with it.
Well, we could say Ung Man Yoi, and I could say Toi La Castagnetti Tui Quan Luk Chin Mi.
How are you? And my name is Gene Castagnetti, and look, and you're an American
Marine.
Marine.
Yes, sir.
I didn't know the Marine. Okay.
Yes, sir. But most part, you served your nation, and I served my nation. I would just remind the American public, Representative Ward, that today, with 310 million Americans, there is only less than 1% actually wear the fabric of our nation in the form of a uniform today. So
Are those alive, or those
those
are
are
actually
living
living?
right now.
And
Yes,
you
sir.
were saying earlier that there were 9 million back in
Well,
the day?
in our day in Vietnam, over 9 million Americans, men and women, served in the Vietnam War. 16 million served in World War II. So today we have our volunteer service, which is great, but you have a few carrying the burden for many. And as we approach Veterans Day, which honors our living veterans, I just want to make a point of saying, remember what the sacrifice and service of our living veterans have accomplished, because it gives us all freedom.
You know, Hawaii prides itself in that we are 12 to 15% of our population having one of the highest veterans per capita of any other state. So I'm sure there are some who are watching who are veterans who probably, like me, didn't realize that the veteran population is so low. That's it's going to make it a rarity. It used to be anybody in politics was a veteran.
Yes, sir.
In the House now, there's maybe 6 or 7 of us left, actually, out of 51.
Matter of fact, I think in our U.S. elected congressional delegation, we have 3 senators who have served in Vietnam and 9 representatives. So out of the 535 representatives in our U.S. congressional delegation. But I think the main point is here, I would share with you this November 11th, I invite all our veterans to join us at the National Cemetery, 10 a.m. in the morning on November 11th, Veterans Day, that coincides with the armistice of World War I that concluded on the 11th hour of the 11th month of the 11th year. So we want to move forward now, because this year at the National Memorial Cemetery of the Pacific, sir, you will be a participant in the dedication of the Vietnam War Map Pavilion. And this will be complementary to the map pavilions we have for World War II and the Korean War. This will also be the
What
first.
is a map pavilion, in case people missed
Well,
that?
the map pavilion will be
that's where they show the map of the world
Vietnam.
and where the battles were.
This will be maps of Vietnam and Indochina that show the actual campaigns and the battles. So a Vietnam veteran can go and take his wife, his child or grandchild, and show this is where Grandpa fought. And it'll be a history lesson. And this will be the first memorial dedicated to Vietnam service and sacrifice paid for by the U.S. government. Because as you know, the Vietnam Memorial Wall in Washington, D.C. is really funded by donations and corporations and a foundation. But this memorial that we will dedicate on Veterans Day is paid for by the American Battle Monuments Commission, which is an organization, an agency in the U.S. government that builds memorials that validate the service and sacrifice of our veterans.
So everyone is open to attend that November 11 ceremony, dedication of the Gallery of Maps, or
Yes, sir. Pavilion, the map
Pavilion of Maps, which would be up the steps towards...
Be up the steps, and it will be adjacent to the current map galleries. So I encourage the public to please show up. When they attend, they're really validating Vietnam veterans who never really got that welcome home back in the 70s.
Colonel, let's rewind a little bit. Let's go back to, basically you're talking about a volcano. A distinct...
Oh, the cemetery,
extinct
yes, sir.
volcano. You're the master over the extinct volcano. When did Punch Bowl become a memorial cemetery? And let's go back.
Well,
to
we've
some
got to go
background.
back in history, and I think that's a good way to start. At the end of World War II, many of the World War II casualties that had been taken from the island hopping campaigns, the U.S. Army Graves Registration organizations went out to the battlefields and brought back the remains of our warriors from World War II. that was a repatriation of the remains. But we didn't have a cemetery at that time in Hawaii. So the remains were held in a mausoleum in Guam or at Schofield Barracks.
Now, what year was this?
This was about 1946-47.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So then the federal government was looking for a site, and the territorial governor here in Hawaii offered up this extinct volcano known as Punch Bowl.
Mm-hmm.
At that time, it was used by the National Guard as a rifle range. So the territorial governor provided this set of land, this volcano, to the federal government, and the U.S. Army dedicated this as a national cemetery in 1949 on VJ Day, September 2nd, 1949. From that point in time, the Army did the interments for some 14,000 World War II remains that had been recovered from the Pacific Island campaigns. And in 1973, the Army, in agreement with the Department of Veterans Affairs, turned the cemetery over to the VA, the Department of Veterans Affairs. And we now have, across the nation, 131 VA national cemeteries to accommodate the population of veterans, who are, by the way, sir, dying at the rate of 1,900 per day. 1,900 per day veterans are dying across the nation.
Are there any World War I veterans still?
No, the last World War I veteran, I think his name was Buckles, is interred at Arlington. So that's kind of the history and the background.
So if we look at Punch Bowl, we see basically the interment for World War II remains that were stored initially in Guam. And from a rifle range, it became a cemetery, which now has, is there a ratio of Vietnam veterans in there now? How many people are actually buried at Punch Bowl?
Yeah, we have approximately 53,000 Americans interred at that our national shrine, your national shrine. That includes sometimes the spouses, because a spouse gains her eligibility through her veteran husband.
Mm-hmm.
So approximately 53,000. Now, we no longer have space for casketed remains, but we do have plenty of available space for cremated remains in what we call the columbarium above ground niches. And that is the direction we're moving. Columbarium above ground niche. And that will accommodate.
Is that what some people call mausoleum, kind of?
Yeah, it's a kind of a mausoleum type approach, but it's really spaces of niches that are stacked on one another in a concrete frame that is outlined with marble. And then there is a nice marble memorialized stone that has the inscribed information of the deceased, the name, the date of birth, the date of death, the rank and service. It may have some personal information about decorations, or an additional inscription, a term of endearment, like beloved father or grandfather or son of Hawaii.
So every veteran watching is eligible for a internment in the columbarium.
Columbarium,
which is basically for the cremation
Cremations.
and the remains of the ash. How many spaces of those are still remaining?
We still have around 4.5 years, close to 4,000 niches available. And we're in the process of getting into new construction, probably in about 2 years, where we will build an additional 9,000 columbarium niches. So we will extend the life of the cemetery and the availability for honoring our veterans out to at least 2020. Another 7 or 8 years and possibly longer.
And the amount of acreage there in Punch
We have
Bowl?
111 acres at Punch Bowl. Now, if you want to compare that to the 640 acres of Arlington, we're kind of small. But we do have in Hawaii 8 additional what we call state veteran cemeteries that have obtained state grants from the Department of Veterans Affairs that pays for those. Kaneohe has a state veteran cemetery. There's 3 on the big island of Hawaii, Hilo 1 and 2 in West Hawaii. There's a state cemetery that will have expansion in Kauai. We have a state veteran cemetery on Maui and Lanai. So we can accommodate the basic veterans population in the islands, which the last census is about 118,000. So there's plenty of room. Right now, the Kaneohe State Veteran Cemetery probably has room for 70,000 casketed remains. The National Cemetery of the Pacific, the National Memorial Cemetery of the Pacific, has a closer symbolism for our World War II veterans, so they, I think, prefer to go to Punchbowl. But the other cemeteries are just as beautiful and well kept.
One thing you may enjoy more than maybe the state cemeteries, I understand that the visitor count at the Punchbowl Memorial Cemetery is just tremendous. What are the numbers, and have you watched them over the years increase?
Well, that's a good question. We don't like to think of ourselves first and foremost as a tourist location. However, over the years, we have become more of a site that has, quote, been the must-see place to see for 3 reasons. You brought up the first one. We're in an extinct volcano. So nowhere else in the nation can you go and visit one of the 131 VA national shrines and be in an extinct volcano. So that has a certain amount of attraction to tourists outside the Hawaii. The second is we have the American Battle Monument's Honolulu Memorial, which has been superimposed within our national shrine. It is the only American Battle Monuments memorial in one of our 131 cemeteries.
What does that mean?
That means that we have the Garden Courts of the Missing, where at this memorial we have honored, through the memorialization of an inscribed name in marble, honoring some 28,776 American service personnel who are missing in action, lost or buried at sea. Some 2,500 from the Vietnam War, some 8,105 from the Korean War, and some 18,000 from World War II. So this is a place where you can come, see your loved one's name etched in marble. It's memorialized there, and they're not forgotten. And I think this is very important for those people that haven't had closure because their loved ones' remains were not recovered.
So it's reason number 2.
Number 2 is we have that's 2.
Yeah,
yes,
that's 2.
Reason number 3 is we have a memorial walk that leads up to the Overlook, which is probably, I would consider, the most beautiful panoramic view in the islands. So you can see from our geographic terrain feature Diamond Head all the way to Pearl Harbor. And it is so beautiful. We call it the $1 Million View. But it is a beautiful place to go up with solitude, meditate about the service and sacrifice of your loved one, and feel good. It's only 505 feet above sea level, but you might be able to touch the face of God from that distance.
Very strategic, like being in the Sistine Chapel, and you're right there before the fingers touch.
Yeah. So the symbolism is there. Okay. So through the 3 great features that bring out tourists or create a magnetism for tourists to come. But what also enhanced the tourist base was when we had our first foreign dignitary, who was the Emperor and Empress of Japan, come in 1994, following President Bush's visit in 1991. That kind of set the tone that dignitaries were now coming to the National Shrine to validate the service of our veterans. Now, going back with President George Herman Bush, he came to that National Shrine on the 50th anniversary of the attack on Pearl Harbor. And we had 6,000 Pearl Harbor survivors or their relatives, and friends in attendance. And President Bush validated their service and what it meant to be a survivor of the attack in Pearl Harbor.
So
that was in 1991.
What would the visitor count in 1991, and what was it last year in 2011?
Well, in 1991, we probably had a visitor count around 1.5 to 2 million.
You were the director then, right? You were the director since 1990.
1990.
You're kind of like Mr. Punchbowl.
Then, after the president visited that site, that created a little more interest. Our National Cemetery at Punchbowl, the National Memorial Cemetery of the Pacific, is the only VA national shrine that has been visited and where major speeches have been made by the President of the United States outside of Arlington National Cemetery. And Arlington belongs
it was Lincoln's
to
Gettysburg
the US
Address.
The Gettysburg Address.
It was in a cemetery.
Well, yes, but that's at Gettysburg in, what was it, 1863 or 64, that type of thing. But then to follow on, when the Emperor and Empress of Japan came to pay their respects in a gesture of healing and reconciliation, which is the main purpose of our national cemeteries.
Could you repeat that?
Yes.
The main purpose of the National Cemetery is
the primary purpose is to bury our veterans with dignity and honor. But the secondary purpose is to perpetuate healing and reconciliation, among our veterans, so that they can feel good about their service and their sacrifice. And the Emperor and Empress, when they came, assisted in that philosophy that the cemetery is for healing and reconciliation. And the Emperor came as the spiritual leader of Japan, not with any military connection. That opened up the symbolism that this national shrine was now an international symbol of selfless sacrifice. And that was followed by the President of Korea, the Republic of South Korea, because we have the 8,105 Americans listed as missing in action memorialized there from the Korean War, and we have 864 American servicemen unknown identification from the Korean War. So we are the only national shrine to have unknowns from the Korean War interred at this national shrine. So that makes it another connecting point for our Korean War veterans, as well as those who fought in the United Nations effort to bring democracy and freedom to the Republic of South Korea. Then following that, we had the President of the Republic of the Philippines, Gloria Macapagal Aurora, who came to visit and brought a memorial stone out of the Malinta Tunnel at Corregidor, where President Quezon and General MacArthur made their strategic plans for the safeguarding of the Philippines. So her gesture brought the Philippine connection to Hawaii in honoring the American veterans for their service and sacrifice in the Philippines. So those were some of the international dignitaries that now stimulated interest by our Pacific Rim nations to visit this national shrine. And we've had many visits by subsequent presidents of the Philippines, the presidents of Korea, the vice president of Taiwan. I recently hosted the Prime Minister of Australia last year for Veterans Day, Prime Minister Noda of Japan, and the new president of Korea. So when those international heads of state bring their symbolism of healing and reconciliation and acceptance of what the American veteran has done, they reinforce the importance of the validation for service. And that's what we want to do.
Isn't President Obama's mother?
Now that's an interesting question. Yes, our current president, President Obama has visited the National Memorial Cemetery 4 times when he has been here on vacation to visit his grandfather's grave. President Obama's grandfather, Stanley Dunham, was a sergeant in World War II and is interred at our national shrine. And I think the President takes a lot of pride in the fact that he has a good connection, solid connection with our veterans and how they served.
I was going to ask this off the air, but I'll ask you on the air. You said there's no more space. Isn't there a way to arrange it? If the President decided to use Hawaii as resting place, punch bowl, isn't there a way you could make room for another? I know you said it's closed, you can only do internments.
Let me put it this way. I would have to defer to our Secretary of Veterans Affairs, okay? There could be time when we would recover a casketed space, but the conditions would be established when working closely with the Joint POW Full Accounting Command here at Hickam, where we would disinter a set of unknown remains.
Oh, I see.
And those remains go to the primary pathological laboratory here, and through DNA, mitochondrial DNA, or circumstantial evidence, or dental records, they may be able to identify that unknown set of remains. Once that unknown set of remains was identified, and the family wanted to relocate those remains to a mainland cemetery, I may have a grave. But that's nothing that anybody can sign up for in advance. We don't take reservations. And the question, you'll throw out the tough question here, Representative. What would we do if the President wanted a grave? I would defer to a higher pay grade.
Colonel, as you are out of plots, we are out of time. We have to sign off, but this has been a great honor with the Colonel Gene Castagnetti, the director of the Memorial Cemetery of the Pacific, a Vietnam veteran, a decorated man, and he's wearing a POW tie, which we didn't have a chance to feature close up. But thank you for all your service to your country, to your community, and thank you for honoring us in today's interview.
Thank you for the opportunity to share the day. Thank you very much, Representative.
Thank you for viewing. This is Representative Gene Ward saying until next time, more leaders of the community to come before you. Aloha.